Azure AI Foundry versus AWS Bedrock, which enterprise AI platform wins in 2025? Welcome back. Today's topic is Azure AI Foundry versus AWS Bedrock, which enterprise AI platform wins in 2025. We'll cover what you actually need to know about Azure AI Foundry. Let's talk about next up. What is Azure AI Foundry and how does it compare to AWS Bedrock? Azure AI Foundry is Microsoft's unified platform for building AI applications and agents across the enterprise. It replaces the older Azure AI Studio and consolidates model access, prompt engineering, agent orchestration, and deployment governance into a single portal and SDK. You can access the Azure AI Foundry portal directly at ai.azure.com, and it sits inside your existing Azure subscription with full RBAC inherited from Azure Active Directory. AWS Bedrock is Amazon's managed service for accessing foundation models from providers like Anthropic, Meta, Cohere, and Amazon's own Titan family. It emphasizes API-first model access with guardrails and knowledge base integrations built on S3 and Lambda. The honest difference: Azure AI Foundry is a full development platform with project-level organization, agent lifecycle management, and deep Microsoft identity integration. AWS Bedrock is more narrowly focused on managed model APIs with solid AWS ecosystem glue. That distinction matters depending on what your team is actually trying to build. Let's talk about next up, Azure AI Foundry versus AWS Bedrock, feature-by-feature comparison. The model count difference is real and it matters. Azure AI Foundry's catalog includes Hugging Face models, open-source checkpoints, and the full OpenAI lineup including GPT-4o and the reasoning-focused O3 model. If your team needs specialized models for healthcare NLP, code generation, or multilingual document processing, the selection is meaningfully wider. AWS Bedrock's catalog is curated and smaller, but Anthropic Claude 3.5 and Claude 3 Opus are excellent for long context document analysis tasks. For teams doing heavy PDF processing or legal document review, Bedrock's Claude integration is genuinely competitive on quality. Azure AI Foundry documentation covers the full development lifecycle from model selection through evaluation, deployment, and monitoring. The prompt flow visual editor lowers the barrier for non-ML engineers to build RAG pipelines. The Azure AI Foundry SDK also includes built-in red teaming and safety evaluation tools, which matter for regulated industries that need documented evidence of pre-deployment testing. Now, Azure AI Foundry pricing versus AWS Bedrock cost. Azure AI Foundry pricing follows a consumption model. You pay per token for each model call, with rates varying by model tier. GPT-4o input tokens run approximately $2.50 per million tokens as of mid-2025, with provision throughput units available for predictable high-volume workloads. One thing many teams miss when doing Azure cost optimization consulting before an AI build-out: Azure AI Foundry cost includes not just model inference, but Azure AI search indexing fees for RAG pipelines and compute costs for fine-tuning jobs. A complete budget should account for all three layers. For a mid-market company running 10 million tokens per day across a customer-facing AI assistant, expect Azure AI Foundry costs between $8,000 and $25,000 per month depending on model choice and whether you're using provisioned capacity. The wide range reflects the difference between running 5.4 versus GPT-4o. Now, next up, is Azure AI Foundry better than AWS Bedrock for enterprise? For Microsoft ecosystem enterprises, yes, Azure AI Foundry wins. For AWS native teams with no Microsoft dependencies, the decision is genuinely closer. Azure AI Foundry is the stronger choice when your organization already uses Azure Active Directory, Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, or Power Platform. The identity and access management integration means AI applications inherit the same RBAC policies your teams already manage. No identity federation work, no additional IAM complexity. It also wins for teams doing Azure app modernization alongside AI adoption. Deploying AI-powered features into .NET applications via the Azure AI Foundry SDK, with Azure DevOps pipelines handling CI/CD, is a workflow that requires zero additional cloud accounts or credential management. Next up, moving on to how to migrate on-premise to Azure and adopt Azure AI Foundry. The most common question we hear from teams that want to move to Azure AI Foundry: how do we get there from on-premises or from AWS? The answer depends on your starting point. but Azure Landing Zone implementation is almost always the first technical milestone. An Azure Landing Zone is the configured, policy-governed Azure environment into which workloads are deployed. Microsoft's Cloud Adoption Framework defines two primary archetypes: start small and expand for organizations beginning their journey, and enterprise scale for complex governance requirements. For most mid-market companies starting in Azure infrastructure assessment, the enterprise scale landing zone is overkill initially. A pragmatic approach starts with 3 management groups, implements Azure policy for tagging and compliance baselines, and uses Azure blueprints to enforce security configurations. The landing zone design phase typically takes 2 to 4 weeks and produces the governance architecture that every subsequent workload builds on. Now, moving on to Azure Cloud Migration Services, what the journey actually looks like. Migrate on-premise to Azure rarely happens in a single event. Most mid-market companies take 6 to 18 months from initial Azure architecture review to having all workloads running in Azure. The 5 phases of Azure migration are: discover and assess, plan, migrate, optimize, and govern. The discovery phase inventories every server, database, application dependency, and network connection in your current environment. Azure Migrate is the native tooling, generating a readiness report with recommended Azure SKUs and estimated monthly costs. An Azure infrastructure assessment done properly takes 3 to 6 weeks and produces a migration wave plan that sequences workloads by complexity and risk. Stateless applications migrate first. Databases with complex schemas, high transaction workloads, and applications with tight latency requirements migrate last after dependency mapping is complete. Next up, now, Power Platform and Azure AI Foundry, a combination competitors can end #39. T-match. One reason Microsoft ecosystem businesses choose Azure AI Foundry over AWS Bedrock: native integration with Power Platform. Power Automate consulting teams can connect Azure AI Foundry models directly to Power Automate flows without custom middleware. Power BI consulting services can incorporate AI-generated insights into dashboards via direct Azure AI Foundry API calls. Power Apps development services can embed AI-powered document summarization or image classification features with minimal back-end code. The Power Platform governance story benefits from Azure AI Foundry too. Data loss prevention policies, managed environments, and Azure policy all operate from the same admin center. Power Platform governance and AI governance converge in a way that doesn't happen when you bolt AWS Bedrock onto a Microsoft stack. As a Power Platform development company, Q Services regularly implements Power Apps development services alongside Azure AI Foundry projects. The combined workflow, where a Power App captures user input, passes it to an Azure AI Foundry agent, and writes the result back to a SharePoint list via Power Automate, takes days to build rather than weeks. Now, moving on to how Q Services helps enterprises win with Azure AI Foundry. Q Services has completed 500+ Azure and Microsoft platform projects since 2014. As a Microsoft Azure consulting company and Azure migration partner with certified architects across Azure, Power Platform, and Dynamics 365, we work with mid-market and enterprise clients in healthcare, banking, logistics, and SaaS. Our Azure consulting services cover the full adoption journey: initial Azure infrastructure assessment and Azure architecture review, Azure cloud migration services execution, Azure AI Foundry project setup and agent development, Power Platform development company work for automation and apps, and ongoing Azure managed services provider support. If you're comparing Azure AI Foundry against AWS Bedrock and want an honest assessment of which platform fits your current stack and roadmap, our Cloud AI Strategy Call is a 60-minute working session with a certified Azure architect. We'll review your environment, identify quick wins, and give you a clear recommendation with realistic timeline and budget estimates. Book a Cloud AI Strategy Call to get started. Now, moving on to conclusion. Azure AI Foundry wins for Microsoft ecosystem enterprises on the dimensions that matter most: model catalog depth, developer tooling maturity, Power Platform integration, governance controls, and compliance posture for regulated industries. AWS Bedrock remains a strong platform for AWS native teams, particularly for cloud-powered document processing workloads. The Azure Cloud Migration Services decision and the AI Platform decision are increasingly the same decision in 2025. How you structure your Azure landing zone, how you approach Azure cost optimization consulting, and how you set up Power Platform governance all determine how much value you extract from Azure AI Foundry in production. Q Services is ready to help you make that decision and execute on it. Book a Cloud AI strategy call with our Azure Consulting Services team to map your migration path and Azure AI Foundry adoption plan. We'll review your current infrastructure, flag the risks, and give you a timeline you can actually hold to.